Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we talk about HR and the future of work. I'm your host, Dr. Dieter Veldsman, and today we have an extremely exciting episode lined up with a guest that I'm very excited to be able to host today. Dayana, couple of words that jump to mind when I think about you. Visionary, I think about talent mobility, I think about futurist. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I think, us meeting in Vegas, I love when you get to meet like-minded people that are invested in this work and future of work, and you're definitely an equal partner in that. I'm really excited to talk all things talent mobility and how to create a culture of mobility in your organization. So can't wait to jump in.
I think before we get started with the topic, Dana, we'd like to get to know our guests a little bit better. So I'm going to kickstart with a couple of questions just about who you are and what makes your eyes light up. So if you think back, what was some of the best career advice that you've ever received that stuck with you through your career up to now?
Raise your hand for every single opportunity. I think it's so important to speak up. I think companies hire people for a reason, for them to have, a POV and for them to bring fresh, new thinking to the table. So I think when you kind of literally raise your hands, you're like, I have an idea, like kind of that light bulb moment, it creates energy and it creates community and it ignites a beautiful experience. So just encourage you to speak up.
Yeah, I'm also a firm believer in go where the energy is and create the momentum as part of that. So I'm definitely also a firm believer in that. Dayana, what makes you passionate about the field of, call it media, people, HR? And we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail, but what makes you passionate about that?
I think bringing the human back into human resources. And I think there's all these buzzwords, right? Like tap into your potential and like all of that. So I think it's more like I'm passionate about finding unique intersections. I heard somewhere that the new true measure of creativity is unique collaborations. And I think for a long time, especially women of color, we've been asked to be put into this box, into like, stay in this little box and we'll let you play here, but like you can't really have a seat at the table over here. And I think when you unleash that box, when you allow flow to happen, when you meet people where they are and what drives them versus like, you're cute, sit over there in the corner, we'll get to you. Like, I think there's such an opportunity for planet Earth to allow people to step into their passions, their power. I don't think passion should be a luxury. I think we're here for a short amount of time and we should do things that I love that you said we're going to ask you questions that make you light up. Like, there's a lot of darkness right now, I think, on our planet. And I think the more we can ignite light and like bring people together to, of course, accelerate business and like reach the goals that collectively you have. I just think for a long time, it was very like what the company needed and what people needed was left behind. I think with my digital marketing, biz dev mindset, I'm able to do both in a unique way that ignites the people and ignites the business. I think finding that intersection is future of work.
And that's very powerful. I think definitely on the topic of connections and trying to see where new collaborations can be formed, being a lot more multidisciplinary and solution focused and oriented in nature. And definitely the pendulum has swung back almost to say that there's this new employment contract around what people want from work and how they find meaning in it. And then organizations also around, you are with an organization for also just a small period of time. So how are we going to make that meaningful for both parties? I think that brings us really nicely into the topic that we want to talk about today. And that's around the topic of both mobility and how do we create cultures that are career friendly within organizations. We've all been around the table where we talk about top talent and high performing talent, and then we're like, but why are these people not moving around in the organization? And there's some systemic challenges at times that inhibits people from really living out their potential within the organization within which they find themselves. Thinking about HR, some of our own data tells us 33% of HR practitioners, and this is in a population of 3 million HR profiles, literally follow a very traditional career path where I wait to move up in the hierarchy. And if I may be so blunt to say, where I wait for the spot in front of me to open up and then I move into that due to various reasons. And that leads towards really low career satisfaction, very low sense of meaning and purpose that people find out of work. And I'd love us to deep dive into careers and into mobility. And to get us started, when we talk about a culture of careers, what does that mean?
Love that you came with the data. So in the Broadway musical Hamilton, there's a part where he says, "You're like me. You seem to be somebody that's never satisfied." And I love that you're like, people are not happy. They're not satisfied. Not the majority. I think, on social, it's like FML, it's Monday, like, right? Like all these little indicators that people aren't looking forward to going to their job or career. And then 10 years later, they're like, where does the time go? I think to your other point, you're seeing people in shorter periods. So for whoever's listening to this, like I want you to ask yourself, when's the last time you felt fully, immersely invested, integrated, and satisfied with like the output of what you do? And I think a lot of people might say, oh, when I went to college, when I was on a dance team, when I was on this, like something that's very like a new kind of milestone or movement or people. And as a human species, like our number one need, physiological need, is connection. So when I think about culture of mobility, culture of career, culture of investment, satisfaction, like purpose, impact, again, I really do think it's about the experience that you create. I think that it's not like a ice cream social once a quarter and it's like, check. I think it's about the day to day. It's the sustainment of the way you make people feel. And that leads to belonging. That leads to, all these ripples that then embody and reach innovation and higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization versus the like basic, like I'm just here to get a paycheck. So I think when people are thinking about how do I create a culture that attracts, retains, all those things, it's rooted in mission and it's rooted in where's the body where you create for people to like truly have a seat at the table and have autonomy, not, again, check the box and all this kind of stuff. So I really believe in this concept of like, when you're like driving and you get to the red light, and then you have to make a U-turn or a left or a right. I believe that if you try to control that movement, your output's going to be minimal versus you allow people free reign to decide if they're going on a cross-country road trip or today they need a rest, so they're doing a quick stop. Like, right? Like you have to meet people where they are. So, and it's, I guess what I'm trying to explain is culture means like integration and being able to have that person show up as all of them. And for them to have the excitement about going to new and different directions. Long gone are the days that talent are jumping into a role and staying there for 3 decades. It's like not a thing. It's not, speaking for the millennial generation, Gen Z and Alpha coming after me, if you thought we were quick with it, get ready for like 15-second changes on a daily. For the younger generations, like speed matters. And I think when you allow for a model that allows for experimentation and flow and discovery, your culture becomes this thing that people want to be a part of, that they want to come together and solve the thing. So I guess, long story short, culture creates momentum and flow when you're not in conductor mode. You allow people to drive to where their passions, their interests, their curiosity leads them.
I really think there's a couple of things that really resonate with me that you've spoken about. The one is, I've never been a big fan of culture fit. I think you should be acquiring people for culture add, because I think they need to bring different things into your organization. Then you also need to allow the freedom and the opportunity and the autonomy and choice for them to really live that out within your organization. And I think that's where I'm a very strong supporter of the whole experience movement. And, you spend so much of your adult life, regardless of what you think adult means, at work. It has to be a fantastic experience. And it is both a cognitive and an emotive thing for people around how they attach to a particular brand, a team, a leader. And I think in the past, we haven't always focused on that. And to your point, we've done a lot of work around rigid control systems that guide decision making, where I think that culture needs to shift that a lot more within organizations. And I want to bring us back to the topic of mobility, because I think something that also happens that you've mentioned is organizations no longer work in these structured, rigid processes. We actually want to allow a lot more freedom in organizations. That's also where we find when people are making non-traditional connections, that's really where the magic happens very often in organizations, where people have that intentionality to say, I think I can contribute there. Let me go there and let's see what will happen when we do things in a very, very different way. Yet, I think we still find a lot of traditional organizations that struggle with that mentality. So I'd love you to also, and I'll share some of my battle scars that I also experienced there around what are we doing wrong in terms of mobility, and why do the traditional approaches that we used to take in the past, where do you think they fall short?
I think job families need to go away. I believe in network matrix organizations versus hierarchical organizations. I believe the growth does not equal leadership. Growth, you could be a subject matter expert and lead projects and not lead people, which, by the way, is I've seen a majority of this next generation wants, because there's just so much attached to being a leader and managing people that you got to love that to want to like step in and lead people through challenging times. But I think what we're getting wrong is like, well, this worked 10 years ago. And people are planning for what they've known versus imagining what's possible for what's coming. And I think the organizations that lean into building organizations that set up the organization for its future will win at the end, instead of, well, I'm going to organize this team around this leader. I think Google does this really well. They give their people like 20% of their time to do whatever they want, whether it's well-being, stretch projects, etc. Companies need to create a little bit more of that versus, again, the rigid every hour allocated for, again. And I even think the military does that. Like, it's very like, they create space. I think organizations are not creating space for talent to think about what they want to go impact. And I very intentionally ask those questions. I'm like, what are you curious about? What part of our business do you want to learn more about? What part of our business do you want to impact? Like, when you ask those coaching, really open-ended questions, and by the way, at scale, and then mine that data, the amount of trends that you find and see are fascinating. And I also love the non-traditional. Like, from marketing to HR, or from producing to edit, like to finance. Like, let people, like, I don't think it should be like, well, you don't have the skills of finance, so you can't contribute. And it's like, actually, I have a very analytical mindset, and I think I can do this in a new and fresh way. So I get when you hire somebody into your organization for a certain role, right? You're looking for skills. But then when you're trying to grow them, when you're trying to create space for that person to evolve, just giving them visibility here is going to keep them there, versus you open it up and you allow them to see the broader picture, whether it's your external partners, other parts of your company, other parts of your business. Like, if you put that role on the nucleus, what are all the things that touch that around it? You got to let the employee choose. And that's why I don't agree with a lot of traditional succession talent planning, where leaders are like, I believe this person can do this. And you go to that person, they're like, I don't want to do that. What are you talking about? Like, so I think allowing that person to be the lead navigator of their journey, and it's like, what are your goals? Let us support you to get there. It'll benefit the entirety of the organization versus, I don't know, just that leader. So that's kind of the different ways I'm thinking about it. And those are some of the things I think we're getting wrong.
I think for me, what really stands out, and it's the first point, is we have to start pulling different elements together, right? So what we've spoken about now is almost, there needs to be elements of a more flexible organizational design and logic that's supported by the fact that we want people to mobilize their own careers within that particular context, obviously aligned to the purpose piece. But then also we need to enable that to happen, right? Which is where the exposure comes from. Because what I've found, where people don't know what is possible, you can't open their eyes to be able to see what other possibilities are out there to make new connections, contribute in new ways. And very often that is then a limiting belief around what my transferable skill sets are. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, right? I believe I'm in HR and I can only be in HR, or I'm in finance, or I'm in marketing, or I'm in sales, not realizing that your skill set goes way beyond your functional domain. That's such a small part of what you do. There's actually so many other components that sit around that. Now, Dayana, I want to move a bit into the component around experience and attachment to the brand, because a lot of things that you and I have spoken about now actually only really happens if people love the brand they work for, they love the experience, and they really buy into the Kool-Aid in the organization because they want to contribute, they want to be there.
Yeah, so I think when you can slap a random logo on anything that you're doing it wrong. There needs to be tentacles to your company's brand, to your priorities, and to your mission and statement. So for example, when I first started on the advertising agency side, we launched a media agency at IPG Media Brands called BPN. And our tagline was radical common sense. And it was things like astronauts find all these things to write in space with a pen, and somebody's like, just use a pencil, right? So we took that and then created employee experiences that were radical common sense, where we brought all of our global leaders together for a summit and hosted a really cool experience for them to embody what radical common sense means in Indonesia versus the US. We brought culture to the table, and then everybody explained different things about their culture, and then that went to a global view. Or another example, like at ESPN, we've gamified career. So we cover games all day, every day. So one of the things that we did was we created this immersive ESPN Career Center virtual metaverse that allowed employees to pick their career players. So I'm a career shifter, or I'm a career starter. The starter was a track field. And it was like, all right, sprint to the 100, 200, 300, 400 meter. And at each meter, there was a different experience. Or a shifter was like a Formula One NASCAR track, where it's like, which way do you want to go? Career upskiller was a baseball world, because you got to be real strategic. And, like, we would place experiences to learn, like where the foul ball happens or in between second and third base, like, right. So I say all that is like we integrated what we do as a brand into even this virtual world. And then we took it up a notch where we created like this like bracket style challenge where employees competed to become an ESPN All-Star. And it was employees submitting their best in class work tied to our 4 company priorities. And then employees voted to get people to be in the top 16. Then we had judges to take them top 8, top 4, and then all employees picked the champion. And that person got to get an all-star jersey, trophy, a LinkedIn recommendation from the executive sponsor of that priority. And then the champion got to go to a 2-day VIP weekend. Year 1 was the Masters. Year 2 was NCAA finals. Year 3, college football playoff. Where then we created this business immersive experience for this champion, captured all of it, packaged it, showed our people like, you rocked this thing for our company priority. Now let's spend time investing into you. So we did that for all top 16, not just the champion. And we created this really cool experience where the talent got to say, this is what I'm proud of to contribute to our company's priorities. We gamified it, created some cool like prizes, and we incentivized people to share best practices globally about our company priorities. And we brought our on-air talent to be hosts. Like we created music fun integrations into the show. Like, right, like we made it a whole show like you would on SportsCenter. So I think like everything that we've designed has been with the brands leading. Like the way we gamified that, the look and feel was read everywhere, right? Like there was this ESPN connection that then all 2,000 employees that were watching that show live were like, I am so proud to work here. Look at the incredible work that and the employees were like, come to the show, vote for me. Like, right. Like people were so excited to celebrate what they were doing. And I think like that recognition, that celebration, that connection to share best practices is crucial. A lot of times we kind of put all this money, time, and effort into this big initiative, and then we just move on. And we're not taking time to celebrate, learn from it, all that kind of stuff. So I really do believe that whether you're a big brand or a small brand, like what are your colors? What do you stand for? What is your business? Like if you're a credit card company, create a reward system for career points that then people could unlock. Or if you're a wellness company, like what are wellness stipends or wellness micro content that everyone's like, here's what I do to de-stress, and you curate that and you share. Like, right. Like you got to put your business at the intersection and create experiences for people to develop, grow, and learn through that business model.
I think we forget at times that your employees are also consumers of your brand, right, to a large extent. Now, whether they are clients or not, they consume it in the sense that you have to think about it in the same way that you would around how do you build the brand love for it? How do you build those experiences? How do you build those moments that matter? However, I do believe, to your point, that organizations need to tap into who they are from an identity point of view and then say, how do we make this real and alive and get the proof points going for our own employees and really do that intersection between employee experience and business priorities? I think that gives so much value and authenticity as well in terms of, people actually experiencing the culture, becoming part of the culture.
I think another thing that's important to point out is I've also integrated new media and new technologies into the way that our employees experience whatever we're building, that then inspires them to think about doing a live stream in this new format or building an app for XYZ or whatever it is.
I think especially in the career space, you mentioned the example of writing a recommendation from the project sponsor for them via LinkedIn, creating that visibility. In the past, I've ran an employee ambassador program to a large extent. And what was really interesting for me, it was in a digital environment, was people really like to connect with people that they think that they can learn from, but you have to play a role to allow a lot of your SMEs, thought leaders, to actually build their profiles, especially if it's not something that comes naturally to them. That's such a powerful mechanism that you can utilize to say, it's to the benefit of the bigger business, but it's also to the benefit of the individual, because we all want to build our own brands pertaining to careers, regardless of where that takes you. But I think that's clever to start integrating that with new modern ways that also makes it feel very, very fresh. I always have this problem where, you live in 2024, but when you go to work, it feels like 1965. Yeah, you can't do that. I mean, we've definitely made the case for, I think, why this is important to employees, right? But how do you sell this to business?
I lead with a lot of data and a lot of heart. And I think when you visually show how it helps our people light up, and you capture testimonials, not just from the employees, but their managers and then the senior executives that are sponsors for it. Like, when you have like senior leadership leaning in because their teams are, like, my team is so excited about this, then like all boats rise, because again, that energy and that momentum follow. So, you know how we've been talking about intersection of employee experience and business company priorities? I wholeheartedly believe that. Like, give me an example of a big company, common company priority you see, and give me an industry. Let's just play a little bit.
So a common priority, let's go with a very natural one, which I think, growth in new markets, right? So we want to expand into
audience expansion.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
give me an industry.
Play around FMCG industry. So let's talk retail.
Retail. All right. So if you think about the retail industry at large, e-commerce is playing a larger role. Direct to consumer is playing a larger role. For a long time, it was like shop in London equals visibility.
Yeah.
Now with digital, TikTok Shop, Amazon, right? There's a multitude of entry points for discovery of that brand. And then I think legacy target audience stuff was very like advertising agencies and brand marketers would be like, okay, who's our target audience? Women 18 to 34, blah, 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 right? With things like paid media, like etc., there's a lot of ways to test A and B creative testing for certain things to just kind of see where sales follow or insert KPI. So if you think about audience expansion in the US, my mind goes to Latino, not biased because I'm a Latina, but because there's 3.2 trillion buying power. The census data shows us that the Latino community is triple the size that it was 2 years ago, and it's only going more. So then that means you need to help educate your people on how do you best engage with the Latino consumer? And how do you start thinking about that consumer as it relates to your products and services? Because that's a new market that's growing and evolving in the US. So how does that relate to HR? So when you think about creating think tanks and brainstorms and experiences, like, how do we solve X business challenge to go reach this consumer? You can social curate it and put it out there. You can create an experience to teach people about that product or offering and everything we've done to date. And it's like, what are new ideas? You can tap into your employee resource group that's Latino to have them have a seat at the table to innovate and think bigger of how to do things to reach that audience. And then a couple things come to mind, like corporate social responsibility is really important to this next generation. What's the strategy there? Who are the companies that you're partnering with? And then I think also, like, as a human lived experience, a Latino employee, like, what's their journey like? How do we create community for them? How do we, right? Like, so it's very similar as the retail business would to get a Latino consumer to buy insert product. You have to think about it in that same stratosphere. I'm trying to reach this audience to buy this product. Well, how do I engage our people to learn more about that audience that then helps drive the sale of that product. And then you bring the data to back it up. I think all HR practitioners should create some kind of proficiency around analytics and understanding like qualitative and quantitative and how you tell an analytical story depending on the goals that you're trying to achieve. I think a lot of people have a goal and then they try to measure it after the fact versus building the infrastructure to measure along the way that allows you to pivot to reach desired outcome.
And I think there's a couple of things that come to mind when you talk about that, right? And that's why I love the example we used. For me, the first thing there is HR professionals do need to understand who the customer is. So in our T-shaped competency model, we talk about a customer understanding, and way beyond the employee is the customer of HR. You need to go and understand the end customer that sits outside, because you want to have a very good understanding to connect that to the internal experiences that you want to create that relatability, which I think is really important. Love the fact that you also talk about the storytelling piece. So yes, for HR, you need to be able to tell stories through data and guide business decision making and ground things in fact. So very often there is a strategy, but they can't translate it into a way that it becomes the lived experience so that people can say, it's these 5 things that's important, and that's why I'm taking decision X, as part of that. And I think if we can improve the storytelling component, then the purpose component becomes something very different, because people want to know how they contribute and why they matter. But I need to understand what the story is if I'm going to be a character in that, if I can use that particular metaphor. So I really love the fact that I think we must think a little bit broader on the employer brand side on how do we connect that with experience, how do we make it alive, and how do we get the proof points that's actually going to connect people to that. So Dayana, I need to start wrapping up for us. I can't believe that we're already at this particular point, but maybe a couple of things that's really stood out for me, and then I'd love some last thoughts from your side, is we have to start thinking about careers at the intersection of business priorities and experience and exposure that we want to create. I think we spoke quite a bit also around how that actually is a deeper seated purpose and belonging conversation that we are trying to have within organizations and creating connection for people with the culture. Love it that we spoke about that there's often practices that in today's modern world with employees that want something different as consumers that we kind of need to retire and throw out of the window. Whilst there's new things that we should be experimenting with in that context around really thinking about who's the human being, and if we understand that, what is the experience that we want to create to them. And absolutely love your examples that you utilized on how do we create immersive experiences that attach people to who we are and give them a flavor of what it is like, and ultimately, I believe, to rekindle the pride that a lot of people are missing at the moment around the employers that they do work for. So from my side, that's what stood out for me. Last question. What advice do you have for HR professionals listening to this? Where do they start? And what can they practically do to get onto the mobility journey?
Carve out insert amount of time that you're willing to invest into this and block it every week for the next 3 months. So if it's Tuesday mornings or Wednesday afternoons, like what's the part of the day that you have the most energy, and call it like mobility exploration, or, name it something with an emoji that inspires you, put it in the color coded on your calendar, like helps you look forward to it, like set yourself up for success, and then go outside and get vitamin D and awesome music to help you flow. I think that the environment that you surround yourself with as you shift into new ways of creating experiences that allow people to then work differently matters. So set yourself up for success there. And then 2, ask your people what they want. It's that simple. Ask powerful questions, create a survey, create a 3-part question poll on Zoom, post it on Slack, see what the answers are, curate it, and then create a strategy, and just begin. I don't think you need the 10 programs ready, up and running to begin. You just need we want to hear from you, always on. And like, let's say the big thing is connection. Maybe it's a mentorship program, or networking meetups, or a Slack channel. Like, you can take it tier 1 or tier 3. And then before you know it, in 6 months, you have built, 6 or 7 new things. But create the space to build and design, and then just let it out there, see how it's received, keep it evolving, and then keep going. You don't need it to be a 99% calibration to show it to somebody and allow somebody to experience. I see it a lot in HR. They want everything to be perfect. By the time it's ready for launch, the business has moved on. So speed to market is important. Experimentation is important. And the environment you create to design it is important. If you kind of stay in a stuffy office and like do the same things you're doing, the outcome is going to be the same. You need to kind of change it up. And maybe these programs have to stay for business stability, but then what's the 20% you're willing to try something new?
Love that. And I think very practical advice. It reminds me a bit of the saying that says, perfection is the enemy of progress. I think in HR, we grow up with things have to be perfect before you can take it out, as opposed to just let's get it going. Let's learn as we go along. But I think importantly, what you've mentioned, listen to what people are telling you and respond to that. Dayana, I've loved our conversation. I always get so much energy out of our chats, and please continue the fantastic work that you are doing as well. Where can people follow you and find out more and follow your journey?
Yeah, Dayana Falcon on LinkedIn. I'll make sure you have my profile link to put in the show notes, but I post quite a bit, so you can kind of see my featured posts and all that good stuff to kind of visually understand everything we just talked about.
Love that. Dayana, from my side, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on the HR Dialogues and sharing your journey and your wisdom with us. It's been extremely valuable. Thank you so much.